but that, like, that lower paradigm shift is so critical. It was so critical for David because for David, the ability to discern truth from the absence of truth is only possible if your state of awareness is above survival and scarcity and fear and hatred. Like, so basically, if you are receptive to, if your overall state of consciousness is receptive to these strongly negative emotions and experiences, then it's not possible to discern truth.
Archie, my brother. It's good to see you again, man.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
For everybody listening, Archie and I have had many, many wonderful conversations, and I am thrilled to bring him to you guys today. Every time we talk, it seems to go into pretty deep waters. So what I want to do is I want to kind of ground you a little bit in the listener's mind, so that way they kind of know your backstory as to where what you've done and what brought you to where you're at today. So if you don't mind, kind of let's jump in.
Without getting too much into the weeds of that career, I was extraordinarily disenchanted because what I was doing, I wasn't fully aware until a few years into it, because it's so compartmentalized and there's so much facade in that world. But at the end of the day, and this really, really hit me in 2020, and it became a spiritual phenomenon. So I was in 2020, I was in the pharmaceutical industry. I was at the executive level in business development. And it was a large part of what I was doing was creating and distributing scientific information, scientific assets to physicians, care for patients, quote unquote, care for patients. And what was being disseminated was wrong, and what was being done was wrong and it really, really got amplified in 2020. So being in the position I was in, I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. And around that time, like a lot of us, I think, began to have very personal and intimate spontaneous spiritual experiences. Began to meditate, pray, began to have very, very personal experiences of the ineffable and immanent, powerful and unitive. And once we have experiences of that direct nature and power, and like the spiritual power and awareness, it changes you. And anything from that moment forward, anything in your life that is incompatible with a worldview of love, it cannot remain. It cannot remain. So it didn't take very long for me to leave Pharma. And what I found over time was that my desire to quote unquote do good fell away because I began to mature and realize that to effect a world that we want to live in, there is absolutely nothing we have to do, but we do have to change. So we have to align. We have to remove the obstacles within ourselves that block us from loving. And so with that maturing awareness and having experiences that were quite amazing, and this is where consciousness comes in.
Was that in 20? You said 2020 was when you started having those spiritual.
A year later, 2021.
2021.
Yeah. Yeah, it was.
And had you had a practice before that, or was it something that kind of came out of nowhere? Like, was it something that was like, what was your history that led you, or what was the door that led you into beginning to practice that?
You know, it's hard to say. Through my 20s, I did not have any spiritual practices at all, not at all. But when I was a teenager, I had a near-death experience, and I came extraordinarily close to dying when I was 17. I had a car wreck, and through that experience, that was the first experience in this life, and awareness, when the presence of infinity and eternity and immanence, like that was the awareness, like that was the level of awareness. I had and I had a communicative experience with, I guess you could call it an angelic presence, in that acute moment, and I was held and protected. There's no other way to describe it. It was a divine experience, and it was protective in nature. Everything about it, nothing about it made any sense at all. It was completely incomprehensible to a rationalistic worldview. I didn't even get sore. I didn't get a single scratch, but I was in a car wreck in a little sedan going 75 miles an hour. It was totally incomprehensible. So it was a deeply spiritual experience. And for a couple of years following that, I tried to make sense of, I was trying to integrate my experience, this profound acute experience. And so I began, I grew up in the South, poor. So things like meditation and yoga were just simply not, they were not around. I mean, I grew up deep in Appalachia, and it just wasn't there, but I found it, and I began to meditate and do yoga when I was a teenager. And then in my 20s, that dropped off. And so after in 2021, I returned to meditation, which is prayer. I mean, it's the same thing. And
what was the form of the meditation that you were doing? Do you remember? Like, was there a specific, I mean, were you using the Headspace app?
no, it was just a simple, it was just I mean, you know what? All meditations are based, come from the same place. You know, it was just a sound meditation, really. And just focusing on a sound or a word. You know, in the Vedas, you know, it's described in the Bhairava Tantra, the Vigyan Bhairava Tantra. It's described in the minor yoga Upanishads. Before that, it was described in the cloud of unknowing in medieval Europe and around the Christian mystics. Thomas Keating talked about it in last century and called it contemplative, I think, something like that, contemplative prayer or something. But it's all the same thing, and it's as old as it's as old as humanity, so far as we understand. So there's nothing special, nothing at all. There's no technique or anything. It's just, it was just focusing on a sound. And I do it every day do it for like an hour a day. So the commitment, the practice and the commitment to practice and the devotion to spiritual evolution, consciousness evolution, it's all it takes.
So it's interesting when you were saying that you had this kind of, I don't know, call back to a memory, right? Like you had that memory of, or the experience that you knew something had been planted in you, that you had some kind of protection. There was something that happened that marked your life in a very significant way. And then you kind of fell into, I don't know how we would describe it, but I think it happens to all of us where life starts to come and opportunities start to present themselves and we just make decisions. I know personally, I had a similar trajectory in which I embarked on a spiritual path right after college that was basically just a pilgrimage to see what was out there.
Mhm.
I was uh I was a very mystical type individual as an artist and just open to a lot of things and started to experience all sorts of unexplainable phenomenon both externally and internally. But then slowly, and for me, slowly as I began to get jaded by evangelical Christianity and just the disconnects and the dissonance between what my experience was with the mystical components of what we're talking about and the religious structure or the flattening or the literalism or whatever you want to call it. I kind of walked away and got into business world, started having a lot of success. And it was just very slowly that I kind of just shut that side of my brain out, so that side of my spirit, like that side of my psyche. But what was interesting, and it was around the same time, right after COVID, I think that there was something that kind of shifted in the whole world that really forced people to either awaken to certain things or maybe to double down on what they were doing. But I similarly, like you, had this moment where I was like, this is not sustainable. When you watch the whole world shut down and everything you've built just is so disrupted by an external factor, I think you start to realize just how shaky that materialistic framework, the reductionist framework, the setting your sights and goals on stuff on the horizontal is. And so that pulled me back into not a return back to Christianity, but a reemergence back to the mysterious, ineffable qualities of God or spirit, or, at the time I was just meditating in a similar fashion. So I find that interesting that there's some kind of shift I feel like that was happening in the world during that time.
And we're still in it. I mean, it feels like it's like we're still just beginning in this, whatever this is. It's kind of like, people think, oh, well, when world peace comes, there's going to be a parade. It's like, no, it's going to be chaotic because, there has to be a reconciliation. And the Christian worldview, for example, it is they've done a really good job of communicating that. Everything everything that is not true fundamentally will fall away by itself in the presence of love. Like that's just the way it works. But from a psychological standpoint, the ego personality is not going to go gently unless the individual is committed to a heart opening, to a spiritual life, to awakening a loving divine awareness. But not everyone's going to engage in that. Very few people engage in that kind of a path. So when very few people, so David Hawkins has had a wonderful understanding, I feel, of consciousness. And so David Hawkins, for anyone who isn't familiar, was a consciousness researcher. He one of the most successful psychiatrists in the world in the 70s and 80s in New York City. And then he left his practice that was thriving and committed to a spiritual life and to understanding consciousness within, to the best of one's capabilities, scientific understanding, given the limitations of the present paradigms in science. So for David Hawkins, consciousness was logarithmic. And what that means from a practical standpoint is that the constant, like the power of one's loving awareness is far is the power of loving awareness is far more powerful than for David, the force of, say, fear, scarcity, things of a survivalist worldview. And the intellect was in the middle between the spiritual paradigm and the survivalist paradigm. But for David, what David was trying to say was that those whose nominal consciousness, typical everyday state of consciousness, are in a loving place, whose baseline in life is love. There's very, very few people. Most people are in intellect or survival, fear and anger and hatred. But those who are in love far outweigh and carry along the rest of us. And that's the nature of logarithm, right? A higher value is far greater than the sum of its parts, for example. So I find that really, really intriguing. It necessitates a union, first of all, that none of us are separate, and that can be demonstrated. I mean, if you want, you don't have to, but it can be demonstrated through ideas like holography. If you want to get into consciousness stuff, like the holographic concept of consciousness, just quite profound, and you can demonstrate it. I mean, you can operate on that and get results. So, this does have a translational capability.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're all riding one wave in theory, right? And for those who are of a spiritual nature, belief has nothing to do with it because it's our lived experience. If
Yeah.
we if we're
Well,
living in love, then
belief would be an intellectual, it's a
yes,
propositional
yes,
component or property. So it's like at a certain point, I find beliefs to be not trivial, but they're almost they can be red herrings in a lot of ways, I think. And a lot of people, I find that the ego likes to create beliefs in order to hold on.
yes,
It's a survival. It feels like more of a
yes,
survival technique because if we
yes,
can stop believing in things, then I think we can actually address what's there.
yes,
But for so many people, they have a hard time letting go of their, like, even imagining a world without a belief in something is almost incomprehensible because I think
right,
that's like a lot of people's north star within that propositional intellectual framework. or materialistic framework. And that's what I love about indigenous and shamanic traditions, is that they're not held together by beliefs, right? Like a metaphysical sky god has to have a belief in order to hold on to that. But an indigenous land ritual can have a practice. It can have a tactile,
Yes.
hands-on, conscious, altering, mind, trance-inducing experience that produces a phenomenon that
Mhm.
you don't have to believe in. You can literally experience.
Right. Yeah, and because belief is an artifact of the intellect, to have a, and I'm not saying beliefs are bad or good or anything,
No,
but merely as a, have to enforce a belief, to give force to a belief, is to separate yourself from whatever it is you're declaring, you know. And so, like, it's like this basic, super basic intellectual mistake that all of us all of us make every single day, this subject verb object separation, that there has to be separation and there has to be action. That's only true at one level, you know, and at a higher level, it's irrelevant. It's just irrelevant.
yeah,
And if we operate from higher levels, then we're no longer limited to the confines, like the linearity or the causality. Like, because say for in love, if you're in a loving state of awareness, causality is benign. It's irrelevant. It's actually not existent. Like because then we begin to experience emergence. And like causality is born of complexity and intellectual perception. But in a state of love, we simply experience emergence. And it's nonlinear, it's acausal, it's direct. Jung talked about it with synchronicity. Synchronicity was the acausal connecting principle. And that was simply a human phenomenological awareness of an automaticity of intention or an automaticity of revelation. That's it. And we're always in that. Like, that's not like a special event. It's actually the nature of reality. And it's always available everywhere. And so all we have to do is elevate our own consciousness, which is to say to elevate our consciousness into a higher state of love. That's it. And that's what every single spiritual teacher has ever talked about.
so I want to go there, and I want to go back just a minute, because I think that like this can tie in. So going back to Hawkins, Hawkins and the scale that he had. I've had conversations with people that have gotten into his work, and they see the scale for the first time, and they immediately kind of ask, where am I at on that scale? Right? Like, I think we all
Yeah.
intuitively maybe do that, but
Yeah. And assign a value judgment to it.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
and so with that, the point that I want to make, just to kind of bring it down for anybody listening, is like he had a scale that was with what Archie was saying at these different levels of consciousness, and assigned a number to them. And so you can go look at it. But I think the mistake a lot of people will fall into is we look at ourselves. And I think this goes back, I talk a lot about this idea of the monolithic self or the buffered self, or this idea of singularity within ourselves. And a lot of times that is our egoic persona that we're identifying as. It's not necessarily the psyche or the entirety of our conscious, unconscious, all of
That's
it.
right.
The idea that you are at a certain level, I think, is fundamentally incorrect and impossible to perceive, because you are going to have a plurality of a gentle, conscious beings that run through our beings. We're made
Right.
up of all different types of neurons and different types of atoms and chemistry. That they all, I mean, if you look at Michael Levin's work, it shows like each cell has its own a gentle quality, its own goal, its own cognitive light cone that's making conscious decisions. So to think of it as, and the simplest way to understand this that I have found that people can just quickly grab onto is Dick Schwartz. It's IFS, it's parts work. It's looking at the imaginal and having these ideas of like, we're not just one thing, we're a multiplicity of parts, and all of those parts have a different level of conscious awareness towards the bigger picture. And so it separates itself. And we experience life that way. We experience life as this persona. And throughout this process, and I think this is where the alchemical traditions come in, you experience that separation coming into wholeness, coming into unity, coming into divinity. And it's an ongoing movement. It's not static. And so to ask, like, where am I at, misses
Mm.
the point, because there's moments where you are going to have all sorts of different types of conscious awareness levels in which you'll experience fear, happiness, sad. And that's all part of the spectrum of being here. It's all part of the spectrum of being on this earth, being where we're at. But the goal and the opportunity, and Archie, you can commentate on this, is I would say that there is a transcendent vertical quality in which all of those parts can receive a loving awareness. It can receive harmony with that loving awareness. And so practically what that looks like, I think, speaking of Jung, I think that's a lot of what shadow work is. It's a lot of bringing awareness to different parts of ourselves in this conscious matters. And I think where people like where we mess up, or where we start to get a little bit confused, is we try to achieve with our ego a certain level of enlightenment or a
Right.
certain level of conscious awareness or love or whatever it might
Mm.
be. And so we
Uh-huh.
try to amplify that, like, for this is the most basic example, but I know a lot of Christians who will look at their life and say, am I praying? Am I reading the Bible? Am I going to church? Okay, if I'm doing those things, I feel that amplitude of God, of light, of love, like of all those things going up. And so a lot of times, whenever we have this other stuff that we feel is like lowering our vibration, we run away from it and we tend to go and try to do more of the other stuff, as opposed to realizing that that is a part of the alchemy. That awareness
Exactly.
of what is happening in those unconscious moments is is a part of those lower vibrations that I think of as opportunities or invitations, I guess you would say. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, I said a lot.
Yeah, thank you. And that's that's why it doesn't matter what you do, right? That's why activism doesn't work. It's not about what we do, it's about who we are, about the quality of our being. And so two things struck me from what you shared. One is the reality that yes, we're constantly in flux. Like at the dual level, we're constantly fluctuating. Like our experiences are unique and transitory, and they have their own guidances. And so one way to think about it in a from a two-dimensional perspective would be, say, like a plot graph. So like you could like have like points, like you could like plot points of like perceived human experiences and like where they fall on this logarithmic scale. Like, oh, like what was the level of consciousness relative to this and this and this and this and this? Like all, so you, like you can, and so you can assess experiences that you have, and if you and as you assess those experiences over time, then you get a trend line, right? The line in the center of the line in the center, and you can observe a trend that follows a non-linear logarithmic trajectory. And so that's really interesting. That it's not so much that it's not a static. Well, my state of consciousness is 487. Like, no, it's like, no, it doesn't work that way. Uh, but rather there's a trend in what in where like where our resting state is. Like where's my resting state of consciousness? And it changes. And say if we experience a hardship in our lives that we were not spiritually prepared for, that was beyond our resilience capability. Like it's when we suffer a loss. Well, when life hands us a blow, of course we experience great suffering. Our state of consciousness goes plummets. I mean, it can if we aren't prepared for it, and that's life. Like there's no escaping that. Um, and so, so leading into the second thought that came to me, that for David, one of the premises of his scale of consciousness was that uh, it was only capable of being uh, used uh, by those who were above a scarcity or a survivalist paradigm. For David, So the scale goes from 0 to 1,000, logarithmic, um, and there are two fundamental levels where things like paradigm shifts, and the first one is at 200, which is like below 200 is death, disease, fear, scarcity, hatred, all like the real like negative aspects of humanity. And then above 200 to there begins to be an elevation in being able to comprehend intellectual matters, and acceptance. Acceptance is a big one. But that, like, that lower paradigm shift is so critical. It was so critical for David because uh, for David, the ability to discern truth from the absence of truth is only possible if your state of awareness is above survival and scarcity and fear and hatred. Like, so basically, if you're receptive to, if your overall state of consciousness is just receptive to these strongly negative emotions and experiences, then it's not possible to discern truth. And because truth is unconditional, it's non-dual. It's not like there's no opposite of truth. And this was like fundamental for David. Like, there are no opposites in nature. There's no such thing as an opposite, and there's no such thing as causality. There is, things either exist or they don't. And so you can either have truth or an absence of truth. Falsehood's not the absence of truth. Cold isn't the opposite of hot. Cold is merely an absence of heat. It's pretty simple. But so the point being is that if we are incapable of discerning truth from the absence of truth, then we can't, I mean, what can you do? Everything becomes distorted. And from a psychological standpoint, the majority of humanity is suffering and is in this state. And this is the realm of the ego personality. And this is where the ego personality interprets meaning. And so from this lower state of consciousness, humanism really struggles with this. From where I stand, from where I sit, humanism is below the truth, because from a humanistic standpoint, meaning is made.
Yeah,
Meaning isn't made. The meaning isn't made. It's
right.
interpreted.
It's discovered.
It's revealed.
Yeah, yeah. It's remembered.
Um, yeah, yeah,
Plato talked about that.
yeah. It's really striking, and it's nothing new. But it's a deeply personal and intimate path of awareness.
It was interesting, you were talking about fundamentally not being able to look and receive if you're below a certain level. When I was working as in social work, we served disenfranchised individuals in Las Vegas, and they would come in, and mostly people that were coming in for food and clothes. Very low, underdeveloped ego, underdeveloped psyche. Like, it just fractured in a lot of ways, broken in a lot of ways. The way I look at this and what we're talking about when I think about this awareness towards consciousness, this ability to hold and receive and take in multiple avenues. What you see when the ego gets so is underdeveloped, you'll have a situation in which people are essentially algorithmically driven. That's kind of the way that I like to think about it, in which you receive a really narrow, flattened goal state in which a person perceives, okay, this is the mission that I need to whether or not it's hunger or shelter or whatever they need, or fear, and like their goal state is it stretches out only so far. And so I think when people choose to allow that energy to constellate, maybe they're allowing, maybe they've underdeveloped, whatever it is, that causes a limitation in that access, I would say, to like truth, self. You could use the word God. I think we could insert the like all sorts of different words there, but it's like the connection to everything. And I think it's that transcendent function where it allows us to kind of zoom out and get perspective on a situation, look at it from multiple views, and kind of detach from any particular energy. But unless, and I don't know what fundamentally that looks like. Most people, I think, Piaget or childhood development, like you could look there and see okay, here's the fundamental strengthenings of the ego and how it positions itself towards the sacred or the unconscious, and eventually we have that shift or we're able to have that awareness. But I think that is a hard thing for a lot of people to understand and to realize when they're being algorithmically driven, or when they have something that is like in control and they don't even realize, like a part of their psyche is in kind of running on autopilot, and you have no idea.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would add I would add to that, or offer that things only affect us relative to where we are. Like, I guess that's a really broad statement. A distillation of that would be that, say a piece of information that comes out of the media that's that's designed to incite fear or hatred, or which is like 99% of mass media. It's all, it's all lies, but you're only vulnerable to accepting that information if you're in a place that is incapable of discerning truth. And so this comes back to this fundamental break between, or paradigm shift between being able to discern truth from its absence and not. Pragmatically, if we're in a if we're in a more loving state of awareness, information that is designed to incite negativity is going to be benign. It's not going to stick to us. We're not going to have a reaction because we are of a state of consciousness in this moment that is simply above it. And it's benign because it isn't true. It's benign because it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant to life itself. If it's not loving in nature, sorry. That is not a feature of ignorance, because it's not a feature of the intellect. It's not a feature of rejection. It's simply a feature of it not corresponding to reality. Going back to David Hawkins in the Discernment of Truth, once you're capable of discerning truth, you're operating not from force, but from power. And power is spiritual power, which is love. You're operating, love is power, and everything else is force. So basically, if you're operating from a loving place, you are immune to force because it's much lower in nature and it's irrelevant to nature. Just take, things that are happening in 2025 right now, this season, things that we may interpret them as evil, and they, could be. But that's how I see some things. But if we can elevate our own consciousness to be of a spiritual quality, of a loving quality, we can be impacted less by it, and it can become more benign. And so if if we want to have a more loving reality, a more loving world, the only way forward for that to potentiate is to become immune to the evil of the world. And that's not to reject it. It's not to turn away from it. It's not to do something else. It's simply to be of a higher quality of mind and a heart for it to not be relevant.
Yeah, I have a lot to say on this, or I have a lot of ideas, because when I hear that, I think the work that I do, the symbolic and the imaginal, I think I've come to kind of rest in this place where we could do all sorts of external searching. We could do all sorts of different types of practices, which I do, and I think it's important. And I think that there are external realities that are the connection between psyche and matter that is great information, but inevitably, it's like that paradigm shift and the experience of consciousness, as far as we're concerned, or as far as our egos are concerned, or our persona is concerned, I don't think that there's anywhere that we're going to find solutions or answers outside of the heart and outside of the imaginal landscape within. And so when I hear you talk about this, and when I think about this idea of awakening to that love and understanding where that's at, I have seen so much in today's culture of a flattening literalism towards objectifying where evil's at. It's over there, it's in that people group, it's in this community, it's in this event. We'll find it. Let's just keep looking. It's somewhere. But the last place anybody wants to look as is kind of the connection that they have to it. And when I think about that, in order to look at that as not a judgment on yourself, that is the alchemical reality of life, right? That is the process of, like, you come into this world already with a set of, um, with that samsara or the samkara of where you're at, or the dharma, however you want to think about it. And this is the ecology that has created your experience. And so the longer we spend looking externally towards at these things, I think the longer we prolong that inner work and the inner realities of transformation towards allowing that loving kindness to go into those different areas, and to accept that, like, the only power that this has in the world is the power that I give it within myself, and the different parts that have been obfuscated from that connection.
Yeah, and there's a very, very big and important difference between when we're looking within ourselves or when we're simply expanding in our awareness. I mean, that's all it is. As we expand in our awareness, there's a difference between judgment and acceptance. And it's very, very important, because judgment is a feature of the fearful ego personality. The ego personality that is in a state of fear or survival judges. Every every teacher has said that all throughout humanity. But if we can enter into a state of acceptance, then we let go naturally of what is not true. So there's a very, very important difference between, because if we approach our quote unquote shadows from a position of the ego personality, meaning the I who I think I am in normal everyday life, and the story and the narrative and all that, in the I who thinks, the I who interprets thoughts and has thoughts. If we're approaching a quote unquote shadow within ourselves from the position of the ego, we're automatically going to judge, because the ego requires that to maintain itself, right? Or to maintain its status quo. But as we accept, we let go. That's the spontaneous experience of surrender, and judgment is completely irrelevant there. And that's what it takes. You can't will it. I mean, it's something that happens spontaneously, and it happens in accord with our intention, and our intention to remove the obstacles within ourselves to perceiving a divine reality, to perceiving love.
It reminds me of, so I do a lot of dream work. I have a dream group that I'm in, and I love dream analysis, and I think it's changed my life in so many ways, and it's been something that I have come to regard as one of the most important, like, components as far as my connection to the unconscious. The imaginal, the waking trance states, like all of that stuff. I think it's all equally important, but I really do look at dreams as kind of a lifeline sometimes, to be able to bring up things that the ego just doesn't want to look at, or maybe has no access to. It's unconscious, and it's in the shadow because it's legitimately in the shadow. But I find that dreams allow those things to emerge. And recently, I've had dreams of one particular guy that I know that was connected to um, a religious organization that I was a part of. And he was, I won't go into too much details, but he started showing up over and over in my dreams. And I started getting really curious about it, and trying to symbolically understand what he represented, like what part of my psyche he represented. And it come to find out, it was this connection to an attitude and an emotion that I had, that was deeply, I didn't honestly think I had it. Like, it wasn't something that I would have articulated to you, but the dreams that were being presented was showing information that, oh yeah, it's like, this is something that that is a pattern that is embedded within my cognition, within my psyche, within my awareness. And there wasn't anything necessarily to do, like when I first started having these dreams, it wasn't like I knew what direction or how to work with it. I just honestly allowed myself to sit with it. And I noticed that as each dream would present itself, and as I would just give space to kind of allow that to resonate with who I was and how I was thinking about the situation, the dreams, his presence in each dream started to shift. And I noticed the most recent dream was a drastic shift in how he showed up. It was a bit more of a panic, as if like he was losing footing, almost to say. And like the relationship was like almost this urgency to try to hold on. Uh, but it was very clear in the dream that there was an end coming to the type of relationship that we had. And he was trying to kind of hold on to that, but it was clear that it was shifting. And so I say all that to say, like, it was interesting to me that as I just allowed myself to sit with these dreams, they naturally began to change. They naturally began to form into something else. And it wasn't like, okay, now I've got to go out and do XYZ or accomplish this or do that. I was just placing my attention and my awareness on what was being presented and sitting with it. And it was almost like the dream maker or the unconscious was allowing me to get that message. And once I got it, it was like, or once became aware, it was like, that's it. That's the point, right? That you're seeing it. And as you see it, it shifts. And as it shifts, new things emerge. And so I just think it's like, it's a really cool idea to think about this idea of the non-doing and the surrender. I think that's confusing to a lot of people, to be honest. I think a lot of people struggle with that, this idea of letting go.
It is. I struggled with it for a long time. As long as, and speaking from my own past experience, as long as we are governed by um, a wounded ego, which a wounded a wounded ego personality is narcissistic. I mean, in nature, that's just fact. And so, as long as we're operating from a wounded ego, suffering from a narcissistic personality, we are going to struggle and reject the very idea of surrender, because it means what if we engage, if we allow surrender to exist in our lives as purposeful, at bare minimum, to be of a utilitarian purpose, it means de facto that the ego personality is not the center of the universe. Basically, like it makes you admit to yourself that you have wounds, and that
Yeah.
you're not right. Your wounded self and the way that you see the world is not necessarily correct.
You can't predict, and you can't control and predict the future. I think the ego likes to have this idea that if I do these certain things and if I position myself in a certain way, that increases the probability and the chances to receive the outcomes in life that I want.
And yeah, we're deeply conditioned for that. It's a feature of, I perceive it to be a feature of the achievement mindset. And there's nothing wrong with strategy. Like there's nothing wrong with being strategic. But there's a inherent, almost seems to be, or at least strongly correlated, is a feature of control. This feature of control, and it's a wounded ego who seeks control of anything, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work because it's not the nature of reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that.
It, oh,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say your dream is beautiful, and it it strikes me as like, this, it's a really good example to me of why complexity is almost irrelevant. I mean, just it's too low to engage with to any value, because for example, like the resolution, like the psychological resolution involves no action. There's nothing to do. Rather, it's a feature of where we are and what's obstructing us from perceiving, from directly experiencing love. and or whatever you want to call a divine reality. It's like healing isn't something we do. It's something that spontaneously happens through the removal of obstacles. And that goes for spiritual matters, it goes for the human physiology, it goes for systems, you know. Once you remove the obstacles to organizing is natural.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just watching a lecture on one of Michael Levin's work, and he's doing stuff with like morphogenetic fields and bioelectrical effects on the engagements of cells. And one of the things he said that was really interesting is like they've identified and discovered, like as far as like cancer cells go, you know, it's like I don't know who wrote it, but they were talking like somebody initially posited that cancer was like a selfish cell or whatever, and it was taking all of the attention and not in flow. But what they've discovered is that the cell is not so much a selfish cell, it's a disconnected cell. It's lost its communication with the other cells. It's lost its communication with the goal state, and it has become isolated and disconnected. And so there's this obstacle of communication that is not receiving the information. And once they're able to restore that bioelectrical communication through these ion channels, these ion RA channels, they're able to receive it's able to come back into harmony with the goal state of the other cells and start functioning in a proper manner. It's
Mm.
mind-blowing stuff. I mean, I think he's going to win a Nobel Prize for some of the stuff that they're doing. But that being said, in relationship to this conversation, I think like it's this conversation scales, right? All the way down to a cellular micro level, all the way up to a transcendental, like collective, um, archetypal level. And I think humans are positioned in a really interesting, almost middle ground, it seems like, where we have enough of a light cone to where we can see and we can perceive this goal state of the future and these bigger forces that we're a part of, that we're within, and then there's these cells within us that are also having unique experiences and making agential decisions. And I think that correlation and what we've learned from both, I mean, what you can learn from mystical traditions as well as this emerging scientific breakthrough is the back to what you're saying, the harmony with the whole, the relationship to are we disconnecting ourselves? And I look at the ego as a sense of if it becomes inflated or if it becomes disconnected from the overall picture, it's opened up to all sorts of malignant behaviors and all, like there's all sorts of problematic issues that can arise.
Mhm.
But as we understand and we recognize that it's like, okay, this is a very limited perspective into a larger picture, now we can kind of flow into that goal state of the larger picture and whatever that obstacle is as keeping a person in that state of, you know, egoic awareness. It's different for everybody.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I hadn't heard that, and I love it. I'm so glad to hear that that more people are beginning to think in ways like this, and it rings with greater truth. I think that it's going to be more practical and useful. These kinds of understandings, um, and relating like this, like the morphogenetic experience, like the awareness of it is it's fundamental to what we consider spirituality to be, because it's recognizing the union of all things, recognizing that there's a union within and under, like within and underneath all complexity, that there's a unifying essential reality. And you know, because we're expressions of that as beings, as biological living beings. Like that's one level of what we are. It's not all we are, but it's one level. Like we because we are because we are expressions of this, and we're all unified, we're all one. You know, it's like when I refer to like a loving state of consciousness in the spiritual sense, in the spiritual paradigm, it's not a romantic love. Like it's not. I'm not talking about like a love of an attractor. I'm talking about like an impersonal love,
Right.
like a unifying essential love. And because if that is what we are, if that is what we are, if we are all one and essential, I mean, and God, if you want to, I don't know why we're not, I don't know why we hold our tongues with the word God, but if we're all one, then, and like the ultimate state of consciousness is completely impersonal. And this is the nature of transpersonal psychology. It's the nature of all spirituality. It's the nature of concepts like morphogenetic fields, all types of transcendence and organizing principles. But the importance I'm trying to get to slowly is that because we're expressions of it, we can access any experience in consciousness, which is to say, we can experience and and engage and have meaningful relationship in any realm in cosmic complex existence. And because we're not distant, we're not separate, it's all unified. And so in order to say, have like in order to observe a morphogenetic field, for example, all that's required is to have an intended awareness to observe it because it's fundamental. And that's really great. There's nothing to do. And, and this, when I guess one practical example, which sounds kind of out there, but I think most people have had these experiences. Things like nonverbal communication from a distance, telepathy, for example. Like we're all doing it all the time, or like influencing material in our environment, or influencing material away from our environment through intention, like psychokinesis. Like these aren't faculties, not abilities. They're not even disparate phenomena. It's just I'm increasingly having the understanding that when we have these types of experiences, it's simply by the mere virtue of our awareness of this is how reality works. And once we have the awareness that this is how reality works, then that's what our phenomenological experience becomes, and we can affect things. We can test, and if we have the personality to desire to, we can produce effects, and things like that. We don't have to, and it's not important. It's in the beginning, when I first started having experiences like telepathic exchanges and psychokinetic experiences, I really focused on the artifact, the material of what was happening, and the ego, the masculine ego personality, automatically went to, well, how can we build a sensor, and like design a consciousness technology interface. And the reality is that we've already done that. It's extant, and it's been extant for 50 years. Like forget Neuralink. We're already there. But in the beginning, and that was one of the initial pulls into grad school, because I was really focused on the material of these experiences that were based in consciousness. But if we focus, and like, this is nothing new, like Patanjali talked about this in the Yoga Sutras. He dedicated the entire last quarter of the Yoga Sutras to this, to these experiences that the advanced meditator begins to have. And what he said, and Yeshua said the same thing. He said, "Don't focus on these things, because if you focus on these aspects of reality as they unfold to you spontaneously, you're going to lose your spiritual direction, and it's going to be to your spiritual detriment."
Yeah.
And so a feature of my own spiritual maturity and continued intention of evolution of love is to not focus on these aspects, rather to simply be aware, that this is how things are. But it will have
It's
profound effects on our
interesting. I
science.
think it's really interesting because I agree with that statement. And I think the tantric tradition has a lot to say that too, where it's like there's cities that can distract. And it's like, yeah, those are a byproduct of what's going to happen as you do certain things, but it can also become like part of the test, right? Eventually that will become the thing to overcome in a lot of different ways as you're on this
Right.
journey. But I think for me, I like to throw in a caveat there, because I think that there's and I forget exactly which teaching it is, or who was talking about this, but they were also talking about the reality of a person that is truly experiencing these altered states or this type of phenomenon. They will have this stuff. It's like, if they're not having it, don't follow them. And so I think there's this tension there that's like, if they're too focused on it, be weary. If they're not having
Mm-hmm.
it, also be weary. Like, so I think that because because I look at this as like when you were talking, I immediately started thinking about this kind of construction of the subtle body. And for the people listening, we're not going to go into like what the subtle body is in detail, but essentially in the tantric traditions or in the Vedic traditions or in a lot of different traditions, you'll have the causal body, the etheric body, the subtle body. Steiner talks about this as well, into the physical body. And essentially that's just kind of the spiritual path of our connection to spiritual things. But in a lot of these teachings, it talks about our physical body, and back to the Hawkins scale, let's say our physical body is oriented towards fear, anger, lust, control. That's a very low level of orientation. The whole thing about a lot of these spiritual traditions and a lot of the teachings that you'll find is these types of energies at this light, this higher loving awareness carries a higher vibration, carries a very powerful, potent force that I think um, if a person's not ready, that overwhelms the system. It overwhelms the psyche. It's a flood of light. It's like plugging in 1,000 volt into a 220. It's like the system. That's where I believe personally, I see a lot of people I work with that have been labeled with psychosis or some type of DSM-5 pathology. They're having these spiritual eruptions. They're having these symbolic eruptions. Like they're encountering the numinous without the capacity to hold the numinous. And so I think that in a lot of ways, these practices that we do help build up our capacity to receive that awareness. And I would
Mhm.
throw this in, and you can comment on this, but I am in the work that I do, I'm fascinated by the connection between psyche and matter. I think that just as a curiosity and an interest, I think that that's really, you mentioned synchronicities. I think that's very important in modernity. I think it's really important within our current framework because I think this is this transitional period in which we are moving from one state to another. And I think that while we would like to believe that we could just make this quantum leap into a certain type of awareness, I think that it's not going to work that way. I think there's fragmentations of bridges that gets built towards paradigms that, and this is like, you can look throughout history and see this is just how evolution works. Incremental building blocks build on incremental building blocks. And so I think as we are coming back into this animistic or this awareness of the things that we're talking about, in a lot of ways, I think that requires these the phenomenon of the unexplainable starting to happen around us. Would you agree? I mean, it seems like it needs to happen both and, where I agree we don't need to be stuck, but I think if we ignore it or if we don't
Yeah.
understand it, that too could
Mhm.
be problematic.
Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, you're right. 100%. And it's not either or. Absolutely not. Like these are natural features. Like these are things that happen spontaneously. When we think
Can I
about
gi can I
yeah.
give you a good so let me give you I think I've got a there's an experience that I'm thinking of that I think is like it's just popping up in my mind. So it was a while ago. I was gonna get together with a group of friends and do a meditation, and it was gonna be on Zoom because I had moved and they were still in Vegas, and so we had set this time. And I was thinking about like what kind of meditation we were gonna do. I was like thinking about it the night before, and as I was thinking about this meditation and trying to determine how I was gonna lead it, how I was gonna guide it, how I was gonna structure it, I had this image of a white rabbit come into my mind. And it was the most bizarre, it was just like a flash of a thought that came into my mind. And it was this white rabbit that stood right in front of me to the point where I just like couldn't, all I could see was this white rabbit. And so I started thinking and I was like, okay, well, should I tell everybody in the group about like have us all focus on the image of a white rabbit? Like, should I do something else? So I ended up writing it down. So I wrote down white rabbit and I had a little index card hidden face down next to my computer when I started the meditation. And I decided I wasn't going to say anything about it at all. I was just going to leave it there and I was going to see what unfolds and go into this meditation. So we go into the meditation and it was about a 30-minute meditation. And all I did was brain heart coherent breath work, getting us all in the same breathing pattern. And then it was like a chime that would just go off, kind of like a sound meditation, and it was about as simple as that. Nobody words wasn't really guided. It was just a breath tracker and that little bell. And then we came out of the meditation and everybody was sharing what they were experiencing. And so these were experienced meditators, except for one girl. She had just started meditating. She was just kind of getting into the spiritual path and she was interested in it. And I think for her, she was excited to be a part of it. And the other two had been meditating for like 10, 12 years, long time. And so they start sharing all these images and the girl was sharing some of her images. And then we were about to end the conversation and, or we were about to end. And she said, I did have one other thing that I saw that was like really
Mm-hmm.
random and I wasn't going to share it, but I saw it like 3 times during the meditation. It just kept coming back. But there was this little white rabbit that kept coming
Mm-hmm.
into my mind's eye. And like, she's like, I know that's probably crazy and doesn't mean anything, but I don't know. I just felt like I had to share. And I
Mm-hmm.
like, grabbed the card and I showed her the screen. I was like, and I told her the whole backstory. And I could see a shift in her in that moment that was so profound
Mm-hmm.
of like this moment of like, holy shit, like what's going on? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and then throughout the week, she was texting me and having all these other insights, this other experience, these other synchronicities. There were things that I was
It just
seeing was
lit up.
coming, it lit up. And so I'm sure you have plenty of stories like that too. To me, I look at that stuff and I'm like, I feel like the modern mind, the modern psyche has been so conditioned to be disconnected from the imaginal, to be disconnected from these things that give us access to these higher states of consciousness or altered states of consciousness, that sometimes like that the physical synchronicities of seeing these things come into reality shakes something so deep and it alters that paradigm to where now we're able to kind of reemerge into a perspective that we didn't have before. So it's like that's why I hold it like what you're saying. I see both sides of it in a
Yeah, that it's really beautiful. And that happens like every single time, right? And it speaks so much to so many different things. I mean, one, 10 times out of 10, I will go to someone who is just beginning meditating or praying over going to someone who's been meditating or praying for, a really long time. Like, it's true because if, hey, you know what? If you've been doing something for a long time, you're going to have your own stuff that's accumulated and you're going to think, you might think that and this is part of not the paradox of evolution, but a feature of it that like the longer you go, the more things like you think you're removing all these obstacles and you think you're getting so enlightened and but in reality you're kind of a part of it is you're grooming beyond your awareness. You're grooming your experiences and it's very narrow, you know but someone who is just coming into something brand new, like Suzuki called it beginner's mind. I'm not really into Buddhism, but that is very true. Like someone who has never done anything like psych quote unquote psychic experiences like this, like someone who has had no conscious awareness, like aware experiences of this, they have the highest efficacy rate. And like this is absurd. It's absurd everywhere. Robert John and Brenda Dunn, who for those who don't know, they led the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, much to the chagrin of Princeton University, from the 70s through the early 2000s, 20, 25 years. And what they did was, Robert John was an engineer, and he was interested in mind matter interaction or mind machine interaction for him. And so he and many of his graduate students over the course of 2 decades created the most robust publicly available scientific information about psychokinetic experience, mind matter interaction. And the primary vehicle or scientific design was with random number generators. And so this is really old science now, but just influencing the performance from random to non-random of a machine. And every single time what they found, and you can see it in like their research is publicly available. Like you can see the hard data, and every single time it shows that people who had no experience meditating always produce or almost always produce a significant result right out the bat. So you had like an initial spike because there was no preconception, there was no egoic preconception saying that you couldn't do it. So as long as you were open to the experience, boom, you're going to have that experience. And then but then what they observed was that one for the overwhelming majority or almost every person who had that initial success, then like immediately after the experience, the ego kicks in and begins to question, doubt, or the opposite or the converse of that begins to think, oh, I can do that, I can, and begins to take, take a congratulatory stance. Either way, once the ego interpreted the psychic event as being veridical or real, it stopped. And so like you had like a high early efficacy, and then it tapered down. But then if the individuals kept doing it, their efficacy like over time would begin to creep back up, and some people would be able to retain, it's like to return and to retain a higher efficacy level of mind matter interaction in a laboratory setting. But it's really interesting though that we all have experiences like that where like before you tell yourself that something can't be done, it's automatic, and that's
Yeah.
really profound.
I
And
love
it
what you
also
shared. Yeah.
yeah.
Let's go ahead.
Oh, to me, it speaks of the fundamental truth of it. It's like just in an instantaneous moment, we can have a perception of divinity and like transcending this beyond the lab. Like we can have a moment that is infinite and eternal and divine and be in a state of God consciousness, and it's transitory. It can be very brief, but it can seem very, very long. And 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 then we come back, and once we come back, then the ego comes in and begins, and then goes through its wavering and questioning whether or not, was I crazy when I, was I misinterpreting all this stuff. But over time, we can rise back, and we can evolve, and we can expand beyond that comprehension. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, what you were sharing, I resonate with that. That's been one of my biggest, I don't want to say battles, but one of the things that I've noticed the most within my experience is that with the rise in the phenomenon of like the paranormal or like anomalous anomalies, or the things that I can't explain, or the psychic or the synchronicities, or the stuff that happens, especially within a capitalistic society. There's so many avenues and frameworks in which the ego might want to try to monopolize on something, or to construct something around certain types of spiritual gifts or awarenesses. But for me, it's always been the more that I can resist that temptation or that urge, and truly just live in a space of like, okay, I'm gonna let things happen the way that they're gonna happen, and not put the pressure on. Going back to what you were saying, is like, you let them come and you let them go. They truly do feel spontaneous in a lot of ways, where it's like I'm always a little bit weary, and honestly, there could be people that do have a lot more awareness and control over certain types of gifts, that's where I'm just not necessarily there, I guess, because for me it's very much been one of those things, it's as long as I can remember, where things will just come and I'm like, "Oh my, like, where did that thought come from?" Or it and Henri Corbin talks a lot about this in the Mundus Imaginalis, like the differentiation between the things that we can come up with, our fantasies, and the ways that we can create images, and that the powerful processing abilities that we have to imagine, versus that landscape of the transcendental, where you're meeting a I don't even know, it's like there's not a lot of good words for it, but you're meeting the symbolic in a really powerful way that seems to emerge from something else, and I think that for me is more or less of the process of like what you were saying, turning down the ego and doing whatever I can to get out of It's like, well, I was sitting like this, and I had the lights turned at 50%, and I was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Everything.
trying to trying to
Yeah.
get out of that, and like embracing another path and letting that come. Because I find that to be a lot of the people in the new age movement or the spiritual movement. It's like you get addicted to it, and then you get there,
Hmm.
the judgment comes in when you're not having it happen, or when you don't see
Yeah.
certain things, and then you're like, oh man, like what am I, there's a tension there for sure. But I think it's worth, it's worth talking about, and I'm glad that we have talked about it. And
Yeah.
I feel like this has been a really, really rich conversation, and I'm glad that we talked about Hawkins, because I think that was kind of, oddly enough, that was on my mind before we started talking today. So we had no real plan on talking about it, but I'm glad.
Bro, like I see it like when when we focus. Okay, what? Who is it who experiences it? Like we have to ask that. Like when we have like what is an experience? An experience is like who has when we ask ourselves who has the experience, it's the ego personality who has the experience. The experience itself is in the dual realm, and it's the ego who perceives it. And so there's so much there we can extend our comprehension beyond our experiences toward an acausal, non-sequential purview. And I think that that's really essential, because if we don't, if we focus on our experiences alone, then what we're really doing is we're committing the error of the error that science has committed for 300 or 400 years, and focusing on the artifact and thinking that the artifact is autonomous and real and separate. And so if we focus merely on our experiences, then we're going to be stuck in our ego personality and our ego's interpretation of experiences, which is reductive and limiting and fundamentally incapable of divinity or divine comprehension. And through that, we're going to make mistakes in analysis or meaning. So from the position of the ego, meaning is made. From the position of love or spirit or spiritual awareness, meaning is revealed.
Mm.
It's merely a difference in perspective, a difference in awareness. And if we're focusing on our experiences, are extraordinarily vulnerable to making mistakes and interpreting them. And then focusing our attention, focusing our assessments, and getting stuck in the materialism of the event. And so, like, this is what spiritual materialism is. In the context of things like we were talking about of a quote unquote psychic nature, psychokinesis and telepathy and all that stuff, remote viewing. This is why I've learned over the last 5 years the hard lesson of uh, of this is why quote unquote psi research, consciousness science, good I mean good science. I'm not saying that it isn't valid. It's extraordinarily valid. Like it is the future. I firmly believe that consciousness, like the paradigms emerging through our understandings of consciousness, are the future paradigms of science. Things that we are just things that we can comprehend as being potential, and from a scientific and engineering perspective, already exist. So, like, forget Neuralink. Like, we already have those kinds of interfaces, and they exist in deep tech. And I know some of the folks who are in that space, in aerospace and defense. But if we get stuck on, say, like a certain kind of psi, for example, then we're going to lose our spiritual footing, and we're vulnerable to go into a dark place. And that was a mistake that I made in the in the beginning of this 5 years ago, because I was because experiences begin to spontaneously emerge and happen through my intention, and they were corroborated externally by folks in the defense, because as these events were spontaneously unfolding, had a real naivete that this was a natural function of spiritual growth or spiritual evolution. Therefore, or it required spiritual evolution to have that experience, and that's simply not true. And it's pretty easy to see that, like, people who are really interested in, let's say, parapsychology, like parapsychological phenomena, tend to be really dark. Like it tends to be darkly communicated because you don't need to be evolving spiritually to have
Yeah.
to perceive experiences that are beyond the
It can become a
material paradigm.
metaphysical it can become a metaphysical rabbit hole as well, where it's like
Yeah.
you're it's a dark you're lost in a rabbit hole.
Yeah. And so that's, yeah. And then you have things that's, and, people, have like poltergeist experience and all this, really weird lower consciousness stuff. I'm not saying it isn't real. I mean, there's enough evidence to show that it's very clearly veridical, but I have to ask myself, what's the personal value? Like life is a gift and it's short, and what we do matters, and our quality of consciousness matters. And say from a spiritual perspective, comprehending God is extraordinary, and wouldn't that be a better use of this life and this gift of life than to focus on what the ego can gain, which is an illusion to begin with.
Yeah. No, I think that we've left the listeners with quite a bit to chew on. So maybe that's a good place to wrap it up, and then we'll have to come back and continue this conversation again. I really appreciate you sharing and doing the work that you do. It's always so much fun to talk to you, man. I'm excited. You're writing a book, you're producing a book, or you're publishing a book. When does that come
Hmm.
out? And
Yeah,
what's it going to be called? Do you have a name? Do you have a title?
I do. I do. So it's nearing the completion this month. It's called The Softening of the Heart, and it is a book that focuses on a soul's path from loss and grief into loving awareness. So it's a deeply personal and intimate book, and I'm excited to launch it. So it'll be launching in early 2026,
Nice.
early soon.
I'm excited to read it. I've enjoyed reading all your other articles. If anybody wants to follow stuff that you're currently, do you publish stuff anywhere else currently, or where can people, kind of find some other stuff that you've worked on or that you've done?
Yeah, I can give you some links, but
Okay.
I'm on LinkedIn. I have some social media, but I don't really use it. But yeah, and I have a personal website that I can share.
Awesome. I'll put all that in the show notes. But Archie, thank you, man. This has been a lot of fun, and I look forward to the next time.
Great, great. Thanks, Trey. Looking forward to
Man.
it.
Hey guys, before you go, if I could ask you one quick favor. If you enjoyed this video and you got something from it, I would sincerely appreciate it if you would like and maybe subscribe to the channel. Every bit of engagement helps. And in the meantime, if you're curious to check out more content like this, maybe check out this video or that video. Yeah, that's a good one. And don't forget to subscribe.